The television show was great. It kind of evolved, you know, from the first meetings that Andrew and Andrew Alexander, who eventually got to own Second City, Bernie Solins, who did own Second City at the time, and Del Close, the resident director that was brought in, Harold Ramis, and all the and Joe and myself and Dave and. From the very first time the show was talked about, creating a show, to the time we actually, you know, taped the first show is kind of a little bit hazy for me. I do remember taping the first show, you know, and realizing that. But you know what? It wasn't like wow.
No.
What a great thing.
No.
No.
Why?
Because we didn't really know what it was. We didn't know how to do it. We'd never. Some of us, Joe and Andrea and I, had done some bits on a CBC summer replacement thing where we did some comedy stuff out in Halifax the year before. So we you know, we kind of wrote sketches and stuff. We had some, but we didn't really know what we were doing or how to write it. We knew
didn't know how to do a TV show.
Well, no, we started working like improvising. We started improvising stuff and scenes and try to get writing through improvising, and you know, on a weekly show. It's not the most efficient way to do things, because it can take, you know, 3-4 days to hone a scene down. So it was kind of fun. We were doing it right here at Global, and I remember that the makeup people here, who basically were used to, you know, powdering talk show hosts and news.
You blew their mind when you said, look.
And stuff like that, and we'd go in saying, "You got a mustache? You got a beard? You got a beard?" And they say, "I'm sorry, we don't improvise here in this room. We don't, you know, we don't." And we're going, "Well, we can't work like this. We need." So it was a little, you know, and it was very cheap. It was only, I don't know what the budget was on a show. It seemed like it was like $7,000 a show or something. So there wasn't a lot of money, and we would go out and do our stuff, and eventually it just became kind of fun, but trying to work out that show with a storyline going through it and making the scenes work, and it was a little kind of nerve-wracking for me personally. I mean, I didn't really evolve as a performer on that show till later on. I'm not.
Why? What do you mean?
Well, because I just wasn't. I didn't know. There were other people who had talents that I didn't have. Dave and Joe were amazing, and Catherine had dialects and impersonations, and you know, I didn't do any of that when the show started. Didn't. And as a performer, I didn't really. I just hadn't found that thing that kicked me up into another gear.
What was it? Because your characters are such a memorable part of that show. What was it? Do you remember the one?
No, I don't know what it is. I do know that there were shows in the beginning. Some characters are funny, but a lot of times it just didn't seem to be happening for me. Even like the newscaster and Earl Canonbear and stuff. Although it evolved into something very funny. I just remember in the beginning I was just not quite. Didn't seem to have. I had the confidence. But when I saw the stuff back, I just thought, geez, why am I not as funny as this guy? Why am I not as funny as Joe? Why am I not as funny as Dave?
Did you find that some stuff, I can imagine, that worked on stage doesn't work on TV?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. And in the beginning, you know, because we were always trying to come up with ideas and whatever, we would use pieces from the stage and just put them in front of the cameras, you know, thinking, well, that was a funny scene on stage. Why don't we put that here? But you know, it never worked. It never worked because you find yourself performing it the same way you did on stage, and they are stage pieces. But they're meant to be performed on a stage in front of an audience, not in front of a camera. And the great thing about our show was that we got to perform for the camera and not to a studio audience like Saturday Night Live, you know. And
you also had a lot of control, didn't you? I mean, you had control over what you did. You didn't have people meddling.
No,
and that was unique at the time.
We had total control over what we were doing. We would work in the beginning with I mean, Harold Ramis was on as our head writer, I guess, and he was the guy we looked up to creatively. And then Bernie Solins, who had guided the Second City ship for 25 years. but you know, for television, sometimes there's a, you know, that he and Bernie was always like to bring kind of an intellectual quality to the work, and there's absolutely, you know, nothing wrong with that, but sometimes in television there's, you know what I mean, there's a fine line where you, whatever. So we did it ourselves, and then when later on, when we got into the network situation with NBC, we had people coming in trying to
saying, look, this is
tell us what to do, but fortunately we were shooting in Toronto, and they didn't like to travel that much. They didn't like to, especially when we went to Edmonton.
It was too much trouble.
Yeah, they didn't stay long, so they would come up and give us some things, and then they'd leave, and we'd go, you know.
Were you surprised? I mean, do you remember the first time? I mean, you're doing this, when you're doing TV in that kind of a situation, you don't know what's going on out there. You're just cranking it out. Were you surprised as it started becoming this massive cult hit? Because I remember coming to do an interview with you very early in my career then and thinking it was a big deal. It was a huge deal that I was talking to Eugene Levy.
In the beginning, it was like just having a job. In the beginning, the first season, when we went out, the first 7 shows, I think, or maybe the first 13, we were just right here in Toronto, local. And then, I think, after 13 shows, they had hooked up with a syndicator, Jack Rhodes, and the show started being syndicated, and we thought, boy, this is going to go out to 40 cities, you know, down the States. That's great. But we would come into work at 9 and, you know, work till, and then go home and have dinner. I mean, we all lived here. And we had lived here, and this was our home, and now we go to work and we do a TV show, and then we go home. We never actually, it never occurred to us anybody was watching the show. And the first person to write a review on the show was Marvin Kittman, who was writing for Women's Wear Daily at the time. And he was the first guy to write a rave review in this Women's Wear Daily magazine. And we thought, wow, man, Marvin Kittman, this critics actually, he watched our show. This guy actually saw the show. And look what he's writing. And when the reviews started coming in, we realized, geez, you know, this is unbelievable. People are actually watching the show. People in different cities and different places are watching.
They can watch anything, and they're picking this show to watch.
I know it sounds kind of goofy, but we never really related what we were doing in this studio to anybody, you know, especially like thousands of miles away watching what you're doing. And then once we realized that, you know, the feedback was so positive, we you know, that was the first time we thought to ourselves that we're onto something.
And SCTV, did you know you were making, it was kind of almost groundbreaking comedy at the time? Were you conscious of that? I mean, considering it was kind of what Monty Python was in one area. This was kind of laying down groundwork here in Canada, certainly.
Well, we didn't really know we were laying anything down until later on in the run, when we started getting into our 90-minute shows. You know, we realized then that we were onto something really good, because it was the first time. I mean, I remember being in a hotel room watching, I think it was our 6th 90-minute show for NBC, which is what we called the Moral Majority show. It had a theme that had something to do with the moral majority, and that's the show we won our first Emmy for. And when the show was just put together, this was in Edmonton, and we were up in somebody's hotel room. We just gotten the final cut of the show, and we put it in a tape machine, and watched it in the hotel room, and realized, you know, it was so funny. It was so great. It was so brilliant. It was so, and we realized, my God, this show is great. And that was another turning point, which is now we're onto something. Now we're thinking, now we're laying something down here. Before that, it was, I think Saturday Night Live did the groundbreaking, because if there hadn't been an SNL, there wouldn't have been an SCTV. You know, that idea of taking National Lampoon people and Second City people and putting them together and creating Saturday Night Live. Well, now we've got the Second City element over here, so why not use the Second City element, which is why I think Andrew and Bernie and all the Second City people said, gee, we've got some of our people doing this, why don't we try and do something else? And it wasn't until the very end of the run of SCTV, I think, and maybe even after the show went off the air, that people started going on and on about it, you know.
Was it hard when you get into the real world of movies to kind of look back at satire? I think I read somewhere that you said, you know, satiring people is really easy, but it's not so easy doing the other thing that people might want to make fun of.
Sure. Well, satire, you know, now is not is something I'm not, you know, I'm not a huge fan of satire now, because it is a very easy thing to do, you know, which is basically you take something that somebody else creates, and you sit there and you poke holes in it. You poke holes in it to get laughs, and by parodying something, you're taking their existing form, something that they've created, something that you find particularly funny, and you find the laughs in and around their structure. It's not brain surgery necessarily. It's sometimes brain surgery to actually create the thing that you're parodying in the first place. But to parody is a really cheap way of getting a laugh. And you know, there is an art form somewhere in there about doing it well, you know. But you know, frankly, I'm not a big, you know, Weird Al Yankovic fan. You know what I mean? And what we did in its day seemed to work, you know. But I think what made our show really an interesting show was that it wasn't just the parody of television that we were into. We had created a whole world in Mellonville. We had created our own characters that actually ran the station that put these parodies on the air. So the parodies were just the icing of the cake, but the characters were the real show.